way about a topic that I've spoken on before, but it turns out that another former Planned Parenthood official confirms the reality that we pushed sex ed on children to create a market for abortion. And in this interview, it states very simply the truth that we already know, that Planned Parenthood is a business. Because why else would we sell out and kill the unborn if not for our own modern and material comforts? Simply put, America's largest abortion provider loses profit if young people are not having sex. Monica Klein worked as a comprehensive sex educator and volunteer for Planned Parenthood for a decade before walking away to become a specialist in avoiding sexual risk and starting an organization called It Takes a Family. Because, of course, someone who walks away from Planned Parenthood sees all the problems that are inherent within those who solicit that clinic, is going to realize that it takes a family to solve the ills that require such a clinic exist in the first place. Klein joins, quote-unquote, problematic women who share the truth about sex education and why Planned Parenthood is working actively to break down communication between parents and their children. Today on the show, Rachel Del Gadis, the Daily Signal's congressional reporter, joins us to talk about flying on Air Force Two with the Vice President, Mike Pence. She also discusses the brand new Daily Signal documentary she helped to produce, which is about a French teacher fired for inadvertently calling a transgender student she against the student's wishes. Now, it talks about women's sports and whatnot, but we're going to skip down to the interview portion. You spent 10 years working with Planned Parenthood. How did you become a comprehensive sex educator and come to work so closely with Planned Parenthood? She goes on to explain this is about how she was brought in because her uncle had committed suicide after contracting HIV. This was at a time, of course, when contracting HIV was essentially a slow death sentence and there wasn't much else you could do about it. And so doctors would even prescribe medication that would kill them so that they could, take the easier way out. And then we get down to her, after this experience with the LGBT community, being sort of shuffled off into the Planned Parenthood market. Within a few months, they said, you need to go across the street to Planned Parenthood. They literally were just across the street. They said the doctor of sex education would like to mentor you so that you understand how to share this message with school-age children. Now, mind you, her background is preventing people from getting HIV so that they won't kill themselves. This is her background. This is what her passion is. She is doing this in remembrance of her uncle. So I went over to the clinic. She sat me down for a private mentoring. Sorry about that. She began to explain to me all the horrible stories of girls as young as 10 coming into the clinic, and really these were stories of young girls with STDs or getting abortions, and even in more severe cases, having objects removed from their bodies. So we're talking about severe sexual deviancy being inflicted upon these young girls. And they were just little girls. And my first reaction was to say, okay, you convinced me, this is really terrible. Teach me how to teach these girls not to have sex. Because that's a normal response. That is the normal parental protective response that every human being should have. And she replies, the Planned Parenthood mentor, no, dear. And she patted me on the knee and she said, we're not here to teach them not to have sex. We're here to teach them how to do it safer. It would be judging for us to go against their choice. And so we're just going to teach them how to do it safer by using condoms, lubrication, how to get tested and treated for STDs and have abortions. And I was kind of like, no, these are just little girls. But she assured me, as the expert who was receiving government funding, that this was the best way and the most compassionate way to meet these young girls where they were at. And so I believed her. I believed that this was it. And so one of the first lessons she taught me was, she said, okay, when you walk into a class full of children, you need to know that they've done everything and anything and everything when it comes to sex. Now, that's obviously a bullshit lie. When you walk into a classroom full of children, you're supposed to pretend that, they're actually children and that most of the crap coming out of their mouths is crap. And if they haven't, they will. Also, not necessarily true. And it's your job to teach them everything about every sexual activity and how to reduce their risk through use of condoms and lubrication. So it really did mean that regardless of whether those children were sexually active or not, the job of the comprehensive sex educator is to introduce them to every possible sexual activity, whether it's multiple partners at once, whether it's the use of sex toys, whatever it may be. This was this woman's job, and we're talking like the 90s. We're talking like the time when you couldn't get there was no drag time story hour. This was legit, like the people who were supposed to go to your school for like an hour and whatnot. The comprehensive sex educator needs to have an answer on how to help these people, children, mind you, reduce their risk. And it doesn't matter how old they are. Isn't that a little twisted? It doesn't matter how old they are, was the mentality. So the interviewer asks, so can you go a little further into explaining that? Are you spending an hour giving this presentation? Was this over multiple weeks? And what is the reaction you're getting from the students as you're standing in the front of the classroom? I mean, is that boys and girls in the classroom? How old are these kids? And this is when she explains again, this is in 1996, so we're not allowed to have the curricula like you see today, where in California or in Texas, where it's several weeks of teaching. This was a 1-hour class. We were snuck into the schools, or we would be at a juvenile detention center or a halfway house, or even on the street, just meeting them in their neighborhood. Yeah, they were really desperate to bring down society. The first thing that she taught me to do is that even though she said that these were children, she was trying to convince me that they were all sexually active. She said, they're not going to tell you what they're doing, so your job is to break down their inhibitions, basically. So they're treating these children as if they're sex objects. This is what Planned Parenthood trains their people to treat these children that they're educating as sexual beings. And so boys and girls, one of the first, I guess what we call them an icebreaker, is have them list or shout out the names of all the sexual parts, whether it's a slang or accurate. And the kids start to say different crass words for body parts, and the instructor is then writing them down on a whiteboard. And so basically they start it's almost like a grooming exercise. Like they're really trying to get the kids' minds into the gutter. So that's the first step in reducing their inhibitions and normalizing talking about sexual things with each other and with another adult. So what's left at the end of the activity is just a collage of dehumanizing terms for their bodies. And so that's really not only the first time that they begin to break down their inhibitions, but it's the first step to looking at themselves and each other as material things, or they begin to dehumanize one another. So these quote-unquote sex educators, these comprehensive sex educators, went into schools and told kids, hey, you're all just sacks of meat, go crazy. As if nothing could possibly go wrong with that. So the interviewer asks, so at what point were you like, I need to get out of this? Unfortunately, it took a while. She wasn't comfortable talking with the children. There were a lot of her work was with adults and drug users or prostitutes. But when I was with kids, it was a little different for her. But I trusted them, and I did provide these lessons using condom, negotiation skills, and role playing, how to eroticize the use of condoms to basically persuade the sexual partner to use condoms. But really, the turning point for me was I was actually invited by Planned Parenthood. We collaborated with each other, so I was never employed by Planned Parenthood. They trained me, they mentored me. And in the world of prevention, comprehensive sex education, HIV organizations, STD clinics, and outreach workers, and Planned Parenthood, they all worked together. And so we're at fairs together. We are sharing workshops with one another. In this situation, Planned Parenthood was asked to go speak to an alternative school to a 13 and 14-year-old boys and girls. They didn't have time, so they called me and asked me to do it. So I went to this alternative school, which is really for kids who are high risk. They've been kicked out of every other school, and this is the kind of like the last school that they can go to. So these are high-risk children. They're about 13, 14 years of age, and I had both boys and girls in the classroom. So I started off with a prevention message like usual. I wrote on the whiteboard anal sex, oral sex, vaginal sex, and on the other side I wrote blood, vaginal secretions, and semen, and that's how we started the conversation. And so as I'm, a 13-year-old girl in the back raises her hand, and she says, and I'm just going to clean up her language a little bit, but it's probably still going to shock you. And she was not being disrespectful. This was an honest question. But she said, when I give boys oral sex, I gag. Can you teach me how to do it better? And it surprised her. Like, it shook this woman. And so and she says, okay, so when you're involved in this activity, you gag, you don't like it, you don't like that feeling. And she just responds with, that's right, I don't like it, but if you can teach me how to do it better, maybe I will like it. Can you see where this is going? This is not exactly the most wholesome thing. To which this person responds, well, have you ever considered just not doing the activity that you don't like? And at this point, she and the rest of the kids in their chairs turned in their chairs and just looked at me. And Planned Parenthood had taught me that if I ever talked about abstinence, that they would feel judged, that the children would feel judged by that. But the kids didn't look like they were being judged. I remember in a college religion course, we had a building off of the main community college campus. We call it an Institute of Religion for my faith. And she came to one of, there was a non-member female who joined one of our religious courses that we provide in this institute building. And she came in, and it wasn't until that she had participated in one or two of these classroom lessons that she had even had the thought that if she went on a date, that she didn't have to have sex with the boy who took her on that date. Like, abstinence in this environment, in this society, is truly a novel idea. Like, it's not an original thought anymore. Like, it is revolutionary to go on a date and not have intercourse with the person who took you on that date. That floored me, that there's so much about the outside world that I take that I took for granted, not take advantage of. That would have been an entirely different scenario. But no, growing up with a religious background, the idea that asking someone on a date meant that they had to have sex with you, or that sex was expected, was foreign to me growing up as a young man. But even this girl in college, who was the same age that I was, had this kind of mentality. And so this woman saw this, and in this situation, the children don't understand that they can say know. Like this is a strange concept to them. What are you? That she then had to vocalize this, guys. You do realize that you don't have to have sex. She then points to the board. You don't have to have oral or vaginal or anal sex if you don't want to. You never have to come into contact with anyone else's bodily fluids. And the little girl, the same little girl, raised her hand. She said, "Ma'am, no one has ever told us that." And they started to talk about abstinence. Now, they didn't use the word abstinence, but they started to talk about ways that they could be with each other without touching one another, without having sex. And they came up with great ideas. The majority of them lived in government-subsidized housing, and at the time, most of them lived at Booker T. Washington. And they said, hey, the community has free movies and free snacks. We could just watch movies and go eat some snacks. The boys wanted to go to the park and just play basketball. The girl who had the question about oral sex said, hey, I'm really good at basketball. I could probably beat your ass. Like, the kids started really expanding their worldview around sex. And so much that it became not less important, but less pronounced in their daily lives. And that has got to be the most wholesome thing. So basically, in a roundabout way, this woman is unsuspectingly teaching these children about abstinence, and it's shockingly wholesome. Now, what is interesting is that there comes a point where the little girl walks up to her and says, well, I'm already having sex and everyone expects me to do it, so I can't say no anymore. And, that's not true either. Everyone can change who they want to be at any time. And that's what this woman has to enforce to this little girl is, no, you don't have to. You don't have to do anything. And it's strange that this woman was put in this situation. But here's what's really, really strange. Now, here I was, a comprehensive sex educator. I thought, uh-oh, I just did the wrong thing, supposedly. I mean, these kids are now talking about abstinence, and I'm supposed to be teaching them about prevention or reducing the risk. But they were happy. And it really struck me that no one, not their parents, not their teachers, not any nurses, and certainly not any outreach workers in their neighborhoods ever told them that they didn't have to be sexually active. What fucking world is this shit? Like, thank God for religion, because who wants to grow up in that world? I was sheltered from this shit. Like, I have no fucking regrets. Like, being sheltered from that degeneracy has got to be the best gift I'd ever been given. But the interview continues. So why do you think it is like a basic concept to empower a young person, whether you're conservative or liberal, with just kind of that simple truth of, if you don't want to have sex, you don't have to? Why is no one saying that? And this is where we get to the meat of the article. I think there's a couple reasons. I think, number one, there's a huge move to normalize childhood sex. Yes, there is. There absolutely is. So everything that you see out there is teens are going to have sex anyway. They're having sex whether you like it or not. So the message is... So there's just this pervasive message, or even marketing strategy or branding, that is convincing even conservative families that their children are going to be sexually active anyway, that they can't stop it. Now, as a conservative father, I would like to insert a little blurb here. Yes, you can. Your children are not condemned to be whores or sluts or sowing their wild oats or anything of that nature. You do have a say in the virtues and the morals and thought patterns of your children. And You need to have conversations with your children. You need to have open and frank conversations with them regarding their bodies, how they feel, their relationships with others. And I know that most people aren't used to this, but you need to discuss with them the media that they consume. You need to discuss with them the influencing forces in their lives and harden them against those influences. You need to tell them to reject what they see on that screen, whether it's from daytime television, whether it's from YouTube videos, whether it's from a Netflix series. My children, all of the depraved, nasty stuff on Netflix that they've seen on these children's shows, and it's everywhere. It's that stupid Steven show. It's on Gumball. It's on the new She-Ra. I even watched one with them. What was it? Oh, the Hollow, where the guy in the second season, it turns out that he's gay, and you're just like, why? This does nothing for the story. So talk with your children. I beseech you to talk with your children, because it's not true that they're going to be sexually active anyway. You do have an influence. You as parents are the most important influence. Their friends aren't shit compared to the influence that you hold over them. So take advantage of it and use it. Just don't expect perfection from your children. I mean, they are humans. Perfection is kind of like beyond them. But you do have an effect on who they are and the values that you can instill in them. Another thing is the culture that they were thrown into. It's a very high-risk culture, and it's very normal. But it's not to say, the truth is that once I got out of everything, I look back even and think, well, who is in those neighborhoods teaching something different, teaching abstinence, teaching about healthy families? Again, families are important. Nobody. We were literally paid by the government through government funds to walk the streets every day. That was my full-time job, to literally walk the streets every single day, not in the office, but in those neighborhoods. Every beauty shop, barber shop, every business, every door of the government housing. I was everywhere. So were the other outreach workers, but no one is doing the same thing with the message of sexual risk avoidance or family formation. There's not a consistent person doing that or an organization doing that. That's wrong. My faith is doing that. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is doing that. So look us up. We have this wonderful thing called the Family of Proclamation of the World. I encourage you to read it. Link will be in the description. She also spoke at the Heritage Foundation, and you referred to it just briefly today, but you essentially described the sex education of Planned Parenthood and similar organizations as a marketing tool. Explain what you mean by that. So what's important is that there is a goal that they have in mind. The goal is to sexualize children and make them lifelong customers of Planned Parenthood. So, by providing sex education, they are now encouraging children to dehumanize themselves and each other, making them sexually active at a young age, normalizing every sexual behavior, including, like I said, they normalize everything. Now, I don't know how much I can say on the radio, but everything that you can imagine. I mean, it would shock you. You can purchase a book called Scarlet Teen and see all the things that are being normalized that most adults probably don't even know about. But by doing that, these children are now become dependent on getting condoms and contraceptives and getting tested and getting treated, and yes, even getting abortions. And so once that dependency occurs and the parent who is supposedly left out of the picture, there's no one else who's really guiding those children. And so they become these customers, and they're completely dependent on Planned Parenthood for those services. And Planned Parenthood does a great job with, and I don't mean to use the word great as in it's a good thing, but they're very well versed in client-centered counseling skills. They're very good at putting people at ease. They're very good at convincing children that they will empathize with them and say, oh yeah, Your mom and dad will probably be really mad to know you're sexually active, but we know it's perfectly normal and we're here to help you. And we can do whatever you need to make sure that you get these services that you need and keep and stay safe. And it sounds so positive, but really what they're doing is creating a barrier between a family and their child, the guidance of a parent. They're eliminating completely and convincing these children that they are on their side. All the while, they're just leading them into high-risk behaviors. So, speaking of the parents, that when you went to that school and wrote those things on the board, I mean, did Planned Parenthood have any parental consent or any parental input for that curriculum? Absolutely not. Not at all. And at the time, we weren't, and even today, unless they have permission, they're not really supposed to be in the schools either, unless you're invited. And in many cases, other teachers or administrators will sneak them in, and that's exactly what they did with me as we were snuck into the schools. Or there may be a teacher. I know of one teacher at this one particular school who had her class in a portable building, so it was really easy for me to just drive straight to that portable building and go into her classroom and teach children about sex, and no one knew about it. And there's no parental input. Absolutely not. Parents, one of the things I learned from Planned Parenthood is that, this is a quote from them, is that parents are a barrier to service, to their services. They know that as soon as a parent is involved in their child's life, or as soon as a parent knows that their child is going to a Planned Parenthood won't see that child again. So because the parents going to keep them from there. So the good strong families know that Planned Parenthood is a shit place for your child to go. So they do everything they can to ensure that the parent is not part of the picture. And there's a lot of sympathetic teachers and administrators who help Planned Parenthood do just that. And to them, this is just business. It's the business of grooming children into a product. And they're influencing the local government. They're influencing school boards. They're creating mandates and state education standards. And they're working on state and federal level as well, because their goal is to mandate this sex education, which is really an ideology, and change the sexual attitudes of our whole nation by influencing the children. And they're very effective, especially with their bullying tactics, and with everyone wanting to be woke or politically correct, or they don't want to be canceled, all of these words. But we need to stand up for children because they are truly suffering. And of course, she's right. Again, I'm not going to go through this whole thing, but just to give you a taste of exactly what is going on with Planned Parenthood from those who have worked there. Like, this isn't like, undercover speculation BS. No, these are the people who used to work at Planned Parenthood. And I just thought that it would be worth it to just go over and give you an idea as to what is going on behind the scenes with this organization. All right, guys, I'm going to end this video now. Bye-bye.